Here's a question for you. Take it away, Matthew.
How many rings of power were forged?
Answer at the end of the video. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and welcome back to another Lost the Plot video. Today you are joined by myself and Matthew, and we are going to be talking about one of the latest releases that has been hyped up. Has it been hyped up?
Yeah. Not less so towards the release of the show, I feel like.
Yeah.
It was when it first got announced.
Yeah.
I feel like it's kind of... I don't know.
I was thinking that. The build-up to this show sort of plateaued, didn't it?
Yeah.
No one really spoke about it until it was released again.
Yeah. I didn't even know it was coming out this week. I was... I mean, I thought... Well, I was really excited for it. I knew it was September, but it just came up on me really quick. And I was like, oh my God, it's out tomorrow. The other day when I was...
Yeah. I felt like that. Saw an advert for it. The show what we're talking about is The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power. Yes, I have said that title wrong about 7 times, but we got there in the end. And yes, The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power, if it wasn't long enough already. Yeah. Before we get on to the positives and negatives of the first 2 episodes that were released the Friday that has just been, time of recording, we're going to give it a rating out of 10. Matthew, would you care to start?
I'll go with a 7.
Nice. I'm going with a 7 as well. And I feel like on our reviews, we very much
agree.
Yeah, a lot of the time. So, this review, we are going to talk about the positives and negatives of the first 2 episodes. I have put a TikTok out there, and I tell you what, there's been a lot of mixed reviews. And I feel like if you look at the reviews on IMDb and Rotten Tomatoes, it's split the world right down the middle.
Yeah, I haven't seen those reviews, but I'm on both sides of agreeing with some people that like it and agreeing with some people that don't.
Yeah.
So that's why I've given it a 7.
Yeah, I feel like we're in the camp where we can see the sides of both.
Yeah.
Which we definitely can. So, as we said, we'll talk about the positives first because it is a massive release. This is a follow-on from Matt's favourite trilogy ever.
Yeah. Well, it's a follow-on. It comes out after The Lord of the Rings, but it is set way before.
Sorry, yeah, it's a spin-off, isn't it?
Yeah.
My apologies.
It's not even anything to do with Lord of the Rings.
No, that's very true. Link to that video we'll stick up in one of the corners. I can't remember which corner it is, but we'll stick it up. The trilogies. Bloody hell, it's been a while since we've filmed that, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, right, let's talk about the positives, shall we? So, this has to be the most beautiful thing that I've ever seen on television, in cinema, on a play, on any sort of screen. This is beautiful.
Yeah, it looks like it should have been... It's film production quality. It's some of the sets, they just take a moment with each new location and they just...
Pan across it, isn't
it?
Yeah.
They just show the whole city and it just looks amazing. And yeah, the sets are unreal as well.
It's beautiful. Even the travel sequences at the start of the first one with Galadriel and her little band of merry men.
Yeah.
Well, they're not very merry, are they? Miserable bastards.
Yeah.
But just even those sequences where you look at all of the terrain and it's just beautiful. And I know people don't like the show, but that's one thing everyone needs to agree on. Mm-hmm. It's beautiful. You can tell they've put £1 billion into the production of this.
If it looked bad, there would definitely be a problem with the amount of money they spent on it. That had to look good, and it does, to be fair. So yeah,
I feel like that's one of the few things that they've done well as well. Like that's one of the few things they've got right in the sense that is this fantastical land, and that they've done a smashing job of it so far.
Yeah, and you say it should be a basic for films to look this good nowadays, but some don't. Marvel related.
Marvel related. They are shit.
So it's not a guarantee that it's always going to look good. So it's appreciative when it does.
Is
that a word?
Yeah, we appreciate it when it's done well.
Yeah. So yeah.
Nice. The music as well, I feel like matches the beauty of what we're seeing a lot of the times because we've spent a lot of the time currently at nice locations. It's not been dark, has it, or dingy. It's been the capital cities of the elves and the dwarfs, Khazad-dûm, And I feel like we're seeing nice locations, which they've done well. I feel like the music matches that a lot.
Yeah.
It was used well a couple of times to create a little bit of suspense to do with Sauron. But other than that, I feel like the score they've smashed, really.
Yeah, it's pretty good. It's Lord of the Rings is quite well known for amazing music, and they haven't used any of the old music, I don't think.
No, I don't think so either.
It's all new, but it does fit the tone of every scene that they're going for. There's not an iconic one yet, but it's all just good, sort of.
It's like House of the Dragon. It's not the same, but it's similar to how it's been produced. I feel like they've gone fairly similar to that. It's not the same, but it's similar, and it's just nice and refreshing. Now we'll get onto the characters, because we've talked about how beautiful it is, and the score's really nice. But I think we're both in agreement. Our favourite character of this series so far is who is it, Matthew? Elrond.
And I was really concerned about him in the trailers because he doesn't really. Obviously, he doesn't look like Elrond, but obviously, I know he's a lot younger. But when you're watching him in the show, he does act how you would think he would act when he's younger. So he does have the same sort of mannerisms and like the way he talks, but also his like character arc in his story is the most interesting for me, anyway.
I agree with that. I feel like one of the negatives we're going to come on to, the dialogue that Elrond has is the most compelling out of all the dialogue in the show.
Yeah.
I feel like there's a lot of sort of unnecessary conversations sprinkled in, whereas every conversation that he's had sort of impactful and meaningful to the actual story.
Yeah.
Whereas others aren't.
Yeah, it always hooks me in when he's talking, and especially to Durin as well. I think it's an amazing character.
That relationship was nice to see, to be fair. I feel like they've done that well, that storyline of introducing Durin and the dwarves, actually. I feel like they've done the dwarves really well in this so far, even though they're only in it for, 10 minutes, 5 minutes?
It shows Moria when it's at the peak of their civilization, and it's like, I didn't realise how amazing it looked.
Yeah.
It was going to look.
I was so happy when he said we're going to Khazad Dûm, and we went in and we saw it. I was like, I'm so happy, because we only ever see it when it's the Balrog.
Yeah.
And it's like a bit of a shithole.
Yeah. Like bridges falling apart.
Yeah. It's not a nice place, is it, when you actually link it back to the Lord of the Rings?
Yeah. It's dark and gloomy, and now it's all bright and colourful, and you're like, how has this happened? Like,
No, I'm with it. So we've talked about Elrond. We've talked about the music. We've talked about how beautiful it looks. I feel like the first 15 minutes of the first episode is really good, in the sense that it's a nice bit of exposition. It's like it gives us an idea to who the main players are and shows Galadriel's quest and her promise, and it sort of shows the battle and why the elves come over, which I really enjoyed and really liked. Yeah. But then the moment that they killed, what was it?
The snow troll?
Yeah.
Something. I don't know did it have a name?
No, I think it's just called the snow troll. Yeah. I think the moment they killed that, it just sort of fell off.
Yeah, I was really hooked on all that bit, because it went straight from all this monologue and like showing the battle scenes from past events and cut to where Galadriel is now, and you feel her like desire to find Sauron because of her brother and all this stuff, and you're like hooked in. You're like, yes, let's go. I thought she was going to find him pretty soon, to be fair. Or find something, and they just cut away from killing this troll with ease, and then they all just like give up or go different ways, and it just slows right down. You're like, oh.
I found it a bit pathetic in way. So, like you said, we had all this build-up that was like mega. It was insane, all this production and this big war. And then, like you said, there was weight to what she was doing. She looked like an absolute badass when 6 of them couldn't kill this, and she come out and went ding, 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 ding. And it was like, okay, this is going to be unreal. And then it was like, oh, we found a rune, a marking.
Yeah.
And we're all going to give up and go home now.
Yeah.
So...
And she just agrees to, and she goes on this boat away from...
Yeah, and I feel
okay.
like the character that they're trying to portray with Galadriel, they've not kept that character that we saw in the first 15 minutes. This character that was determined, that was going to do anything without anyone else's say-so. She's gone from that to, I'll just do as I'm told, really, and get pushed around quite easily.
Yeah, she was like... I thought it was her quest. I thought she was the one, like... Not necessarily in charge, but she felt like she had some sort of power and a crew, but then none of them really liked her, and they all just left her, and she didn't continue it on her own. She just sort of accepted that okay, it's nothing. Even though she found a marking of Sauron's marking, so obviously he's still around. So why has she just agreed to
give up?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I just don't think she'd do that.
No, I agree. I feel like it was a bit pathetic and how they did it. I like that. That's not how that should have finished and then changed.
So, yeah, it went from being a really good thing to a really
Bad thing. Yeah.
Because now in episode 2, I just don't care what she's doing.
No, the bit with the swimming and the boat and meeting that bloke, I don't know his name because I don't know the name of any characters because
really.
we only see him for 3 minutes at a time, other than Elrond and Galadriel. Yeah, I don't care for that at all. The only other storyline, just before we go on to negatives, the only other storyline that I'm fairly interested in is Arondir, the elf that's with his bow and that's just been... Oh, I don't really want to say it just for people that haven't seen it.
Yeah, we're doing a non-spoiler one.
Oh, well, I don't know.
Well, yeah, we won't say it.
We've already talked about various bits, but we won't say what happens. Apologies if we've spoiled anything so far. But Arondir's story, I feel like it's the most other one that's interesting.
Yeah.
Compared to others.
Yeah, there's some sort of intrigue there, and like some sort of weight to what he's doing.
Yeah.
And like he's with kind of likable characters as well. He seems like a bit of a badass himself. Like, him and Auron's storylines are the two that I'm following the most and want to see the most. When it cuts away to the other two, I don't care.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Right. I feel like we've sort of stretched at the positives a little bit because negatives, unfortunately, there are a few. Do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, it's the pacing and the story really. It's so after the first 15 minutes, it's slow through the whole thing, and I don't mind slow storylines in cases like Dune and Game of Thrones, sort of. Where there's everything they're doing or having conversations about is intriguing, interesting, has weight to it. There's a purpose for it. But with this, all the characters are all in this scenario where you've got to build up to them, and you don't know many of them, and they're just kind of it's hard to explain. They're just not getting anywhere with it.
It's slow. The pacing of it's shambolic because there's so many characters that we need to get to know. They're not spending enough time on each character to develop those throughout the first 2 episodes. Like, we'll spend 5 minutes on Galadriel, 5 minutes on Arondir, 5 minutes on the Harfoots, 5 minutes on Elrond, and then it will just do that constantly. Like, I wouldn't have mind if Arondir and the Harfoots were not even introduced in the first episode, and we just focus on Elrond and Galadriel and that little sort of storyline. Them 2 storylines would have been interesting. Then the second episode introduced these 2 because they're the 4 main storylines.
Yeah.
But the show spends too much time trying to develop each one, so it doesn't allow us to have a connection with anyone or really get
don't know
into
how
it.
They're relevant either yet.
Yeah.
So we're just kind of like watching it, not knowing what's going to happen, which is like all right, but there's nothing happening to make it interesting until that point.
Yeah.
So, like with the Harfoots, there's this character they've introduced to, and there's just like we have no idea what's going on, but there's nothing interesting happening to develop it. They're just sort of talking. They're just you don't care about either character because there's no scenario that it puts them in to make you care about them.
No.
You're just watching 2 characters have a conversation you don't know anything about. You don't know why they're having this conversation. You don't know what it's about. And it's slow.
I feel like it's written quite poorly as well. Like, so a lot of the dialogue that happens just seems unnecessary and a bit shit. Like, there's an instance, I can't remember if it was episode 2, where someone finds something in a crater in the earth.
Yes.
And that conversation between those 2 people was painful. She just kept saying, nope, don't do it. What are you doing? For about 5 minutes. And I'm like, what a waste of air.
Yeah. There's something with Galadriel as well, where they could have just done it in one scene, but it took a whole episode.
Yeah.
And that it drags. It does feel like it drags. It's not like you can drag it out because it's interesting. It's not interesting. It could have happened in one scene, and then you could focus on someone else that is interesting, like Elrond.
So we're obviously talking about the storyline being the worst thing about it, really. But Amazon don't have the rights to the Silmarillion, which is like the known as like the Bible, isn't it, of Lord of the Rings, with all these different stories developing Middle Earth. I think that's why the storyline isn't as good, because yes, they've got the source material, but they're not allowed to use it, so they've had to adapt it. And when you adapt it, sometimes when it starts off being that good, when you adapt it, it sort of loses weight, and it's a bit like the Game of Thrones.
Yeah,
That fell off a fucking cliff, didn't it?
yeah, but that's on the writers though, isn't it? Because if you're not going to adapt it how it is in the books, you need something else that they're writing into the show to make it interesting and intriguing.
Yeah.
And have something going on, rather than, because I don't have any doubt that all of these storylines are going to lead to something good, or they're all going to tie in at some point, or you're going to find out more about each storyline that is interesting. But it's getting to that point with all of them at the same time, cutting between all of them throughout 2 episodes. It's too much.
It's painful.
Well, yeah,
It's painful.
Yeah,
And it's talking about, like I've mentioned Game of Thrones and the House of the Dragon a couple of times. What Game of Thrones did so well is that they didn't try and progress each character's storyline at the same time. There were 10 episodes in series 1. There are easily episodes where they don't focus on a character because they don't need to. They're not relevant to the story yet, and then when their time comes, they progress that story to match up with everyone else's. And I feel like what the Rings of Power haven't done is that. They've not really allowed time to develop one character.
But also in Game of Thrones, it does cut between some different storylines, but it does it in a way that isn't. So it'll spend like 20 minutes with Jon Snow, which is a good amount of time to flesh out that storyline and make it go somewhere in that episode for it to be interesting and relevant. And then it will go for 20 minutes to another character, and then 20 minutes to another, and then the episode will end, and it won't necessarily have all the characters in the show in it, but then the next one might not have Jon Snow in it or whatever. But because there's so a good amount of time dedicated to each part, there's no cuts in between. So when you're with the Half-Foots and you're spending 5 minutes with that guy, with the guy they're talking to, without spoiling it, they have a conversation which will take a minute, and then it'll just cut to Elrond, who's having a conversation with Durin for about 2 minutes, and then it'll cut to Galadriel, who's having a conversation, but it'll do that each time, and it's just like, just spend 20 minutes on Galadriel, 20 minutes then on Elrond, and it might actually get somewhere that's interesting, and you might care about the characters more.
Yeah.
Because you're going with them through the story instead of just going with all of them individually. So it'll have 4, which is boring because you're at the start of each storyline instead of getting to it and then doing the next one.
Agreed.
That's why the pacing's so bad for me.
Agreed. No, I completely agree, and I feel like you've said everything that needs to be said there with the negatives.
Yeah.
Like, the pacing's completely off. You don't have any sort of care for any of the characters. The storylines are quite basic. There's only 2 out of the 4. And before we wrap up this video, the Harfoots are the worst thing to happen to Middle-earth. I don't care if they're what the Hobbits were before they became Hobbits. They are boring. They are annoying. And that whole storyline with them and that man that can't talk is irritating the absolute life out of me.
Yeah. It is, honestly, you'll find out when you watch it. It's not a fun watch.
No.
It might end up being something, but I
think it's going to end up being something massive, and he's going to be something massive.
Yeah.
But I also have this fear that it won't.
Yeah. Because these I might be right in thinking these Half-Foots aren't in the books at all. They're like, I don't think there's any hobbits or little Half-Foot people or anything in this storyline at all in this age. So they've put them in for this show, and you can tell that's the weakest storyline, which is on the writers, isn't it?
Yeah.
Really.
And when you try and shoehorn something into a story, it gets quite painful at times, doesn't it? And I feel like when you try and shoehorn something so hard, like comedy in Marvel things, it makes it painful to watch, especially She-Hulk, because we need to mention that because that's terrible.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Anything else you want to add, Matthew?
No, I think we've covered everything because not a lot happens.
Yeah. To be fair, we've done quite well to stretch this to the time we have with not a lot happening that much at all. And it is slow. A lot of people are going, it's boring. Yeah. And to be honest, with how beautiful it looks, that can't make up for the fact that a lot of the time it is dull. And
all of them have potential, but right now we're not at that potential. And because they haven't released all the episodes in one, you can't just binge it and then go, that was a good season, because you've saw how each storyline
develops. Yeah.
You've just got to wait, and you're given the start of every storyline, and you're like, well, I've not really watched anything here.
That's quite dangerous, because I feel like that's a lot easier for people to not bother with the next episodes.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of comments on certain things saying like they haven't made me want to watch the third one.
Yeah, it's quite painful. When you do it right, like Stranger Things, brilliant. Like Game of Thrones, brilliant. But when you've started off this poorly, it's quite hard. It's like She-Hulk as well. A lot of people I've seen have gone, nah, I'm not interested.
Yeah, I haven't even watched the most recent one.
Exactly. So Amazon are treading a very, very... They're on thin ice, because I feel like a lot of people, if the third one doesn't live up to expectations, they're going to fall through that ice, and it's going to be a catastrophe of $1 billion spent.
Yeah, I think they're going to commit to it either way, because they've spent so much money on it.
They've got to, haven't they?
I just hope that does pay off at the end, because if it doesn't, there's not going to be any hype for the next season.
No. And can we also just briefly mention the fact that this is obviously a standalone series. It links to the Lord of the Rings, but ultimately doesn't link to anything that's happened other than Sauron. Yeah, it's the build up to that. I'm fed up of TV shows like House of the Dragon and The Rings of Power having that little shitty title, The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power. You don't need to put The Lord of the Rings there. Just allow it as The Rings of Power. That's the studios, that's the production that are too shit scared to have a project on its own and let it be on its own. You've only included Game of Thrones, House of the Dragon to create hype and get people interested. If it was just House of the Dragon, that's good.
It would make sense for the show.
Yeah.
Because Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power, the first bit, the Lord of the Rings, is specifically for the Lord of the Rings trilogy. That makes sense for the title of that show, but it doesn't make sense here because
the rings aren't even there.
No. The Rings of Power is how they're made, sort of thing. I think is how they're going to do this in this show.
I don't know. It's completely they're doing.
Yeah, it doesn't have any, other than a couple of characters, it doesn't have any tie-in at all.
No.
So yeah, it should just stick to its own title.
I agree. Sorry, I had to get it off my chest
Yeah.
because it's been paining me a lot because I just didn't see the bloody point in it.
Clickbaiting titles. I think.
Yeah, bloody is clickbaiting titles, you bastards. Right, that brings us to the end of our review for The Rings of Power episode 1 and 2. We will be back to review the whole series. We're not going to do every episode because that would be hard. We will do it on TikTok and we will take it in turns to go through each episode. We're doing that with the House of the Dragon, as well. So look for more on TikTok and Instagram as well. I will put those pages up on the top of the screen there. But before we go, before we leave, we've got a question to answer, Matthew.
Yes. So, the question was, how many rings were forged? And the answer is
20.
Yeah.
And if we're breaking them down, it's 9 for men.
Yeah, 7 for dwarves.
3 for elves.
And the 1 ring
for the man himself, Sauron. Yeah. Right. I'm hoping a lot of you got that before. If you don't, read a bloody book or watch the films. They're absolutely incredible. We hope that was all right. And if you agree or disagree with anything that we've said, leave a comment down below, like the video, subscribe, ring our bell, as Matt always loves. And we'll see you in the next one.
Yeah, take care.
Wee wee.